All right. Good morning and mabuhay, everyone. A warm welcome to the second in our series of economic fora on foreign development investments and proposed economic amendments to the 1987 Constitution. I'm Remy De Leon, Communication Officer for the Center for Research and Communication. And I'll be your host as we go through the discussions for today, which have the potential to have significant impact on the future of the country and the life of the Filipino people. CRC is, of course, a co organizer of this event, and we are eager to see a serious, even handed discussion on this matter, uh, especially on our specific topic today, which is what impact opening the Philippine economy might have on the labor sector and on jobs specifically. This series is led by the Department of the Interior and Local Government. And aside from the Center for Research and Communication, the co organizers are the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung Philippines Office, the Center for Strategy, Enterprise, and Intelligence, or SENSE, the Development Academy of the Philippines Graduate School of Public Development Management, the Philippine Society for Public Administration, or PSPA, and Blueprint.ph. Now, just a few notes before we begin our webinar proper. For this particular Zoom webinar, participants will be able to interact through the chat room function. You should be able to find the chat box down at the bottom of your Zoom screens. We have a lot of participants, so to avoid confusion, panelists will only see videos of myself as MC and of their co-panelists. So, if participants have questions, we encourage you to put them up on the chat box, and we will get to as many of them as we can later during the open forum. Unfortunately, we don't have that many hours to do this, so we'll just try to answer as many of your questions as we can. I've been informed that the certificates will be issued to the participants in the Zoom meeting by request after they have attended the two sessions we've had so far. That means the launch event earlier this month and the event we're having right now. Watch out for those in your email boxes alongside the registration links for session three of the series. Now, let's begin by posing for a moment of prayer.
Prayer Against COVID-19 by Bishop Ephraim Tendero. Our Almighty God, Creator of heaven and earth, we come before you today on behalf of our nation, the Philippines, now under extreme threat of the COVID-19. We praise you that you neither slumber nor sleep, and you are watching over our land and our people, especially in these perilous times. Our help comes from you. We cry out for your mercy and protection against this virus. We declare that you alone are our refuge, our place of safety. We pray that you protect our people from this deadly disease and rescue our land from this dangerous trap. Grant our President and all our national and local leaders wisdom and understanding as they establish and implement guidelines, measures, and strategies in fighting against COVID-19. Enable our health officials and medical personnel with your strength and power as they attend to the sick and vulnerable, and help many others to stay healthy. Lead the medical scientists here and around the world who are working double time to find the antidote to COVID-19. In these dangerous times, grant us your grace and peace to stay calm and to overcome fear, because the spirit of fear does not come from you. Instead, you have given us faith, hope, and love. You have given us power and a sound mind. Your word says that you will keep in perfect peace those whose eyes are fixed on you. Finally, we pray that in the midst of this pandemic, you will unite our people in love, bind our nation in peace, and bring hope and healing to our land with your grace and your power. In the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
All right. I know we have a lot to discuss today, but of course, I have to greet some of our very distinguished guests who I've just been told are present today. Uh, Greetings, of course, to Dean Joel Tan Torres of the University of the Philippines Virata School of Business, the Municipal Mayor of Mangaldan, Mary Marilyn Lambino, the Municipal Mayor of Conor Apayao, Martina Dangoy. Uh, Apologies if I mispronounce some of the names. Municipal Mayor of Santa Maria, Pangasinan, Julius Ramos. Municipal Mayor of Sulop, Attorney Jose Jimmy Sagarino. Municipal Mayor of Bautista, Amadeo Espino. Municipal Mayor of Dimiao, Randolph Ang, Municipal Mayor of Tuao, Attorney Francisco Mamba Jr., Municipal Mayor of Alacapan, Harry Florida, Municipal Mayor of Tapas, Roberto Palomar, Municipal Mayor of Maayon, Raymond Malapajo, Municipal Mayor of Giginto, Bulacan, Ambrosio Cruz. Apologies, I have a little problem with my screen. Municipal Mayor of Midsayap, North Cotabato, Romeo Arana. Regional Director of DILG Region 1, James Fadrilan. Assistant Regional Director of DILG Region 1, Agnes De Leon. Assistant Regional Director of DILG Region 11, Abdullah Matalam. And the various provincial, municipals, and city directors of DILG and of the LGUs. We also have in the Zoom right now Assistant Director Bien Janine Bolakating of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Director Daryl Tonolete of the Commission of Audit, Director Diana May Cabrales of the Department of Information and Communications Technology, uh, Communi- Committee Secretary on Constitutional Amendments, Aline Ruth Vidal Villaluz, uh, Managing Director Paulo Lasarte of the UANP, University of Asia and the Pacific, Program Manager Jerome Hogno of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, Philippines, Usec Maria Catalina Cabral of the DPWH, Assistant Ombudsman Cesar Asuncion of the Office of the Ombudsman, of course, uh, President Daniel Rodriguez Reyes of the Center for Research and Communication, State Counsel Alden Luna from the Department of Justice, Director Christine Joy Paras from the Office of the Cabinet Secretariat, Labor Attaché Don Albert Philippe Angkog of the Department of Labor and Employment, and Committee Secretary Maria Cecilia Mactal of the Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes Committee of the Senate, and Director or Chief for Legislation Michael Arferia Silvia Palma from the Office of Senator Recto, and CLO Jovi Valenton from the Office of Senator Angara. And of course, I'm very glad to note the presence of our friends from the academe, from the civil society sector. I think I see a few names there. And of course, the Fourth Estate, our dear friends in the media from the press. Uh, Now, with those greetings out of the way, let's hear a message from a former from a former member of the press, having authored an opinion column himself. He is also the author of several books, including a very relevant one to our topic today, titled "Liberal Views on Constitutional Reform." To formally open our session today, please welcome the Undersecretary for Plans, Public Affairs, and Communication of the Department of the Interior and Local Government, Undersecretary Jonathan E. Malaya.
Magandang umaga. Thank you. Thank you, Remy, for that wonderful introduction. Unahin ko lang pong batiin, of course, the chairman and siguro kapareho kong Uragon, Congressman Alfredo Garbin of Ako Bicol Party List, who is also the chairman of the House Committee on Constitutional Amendments. Sir, magandang umaga po. We will be joined later on by Secretary Silvestre Bello. Of course, our partners in this endeavor, from the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, our long partner in political and economic reform of the Philippines, represented today by Ms. Tonette de Jesus. Hi, Tonette. Hello. And one of the other panelists, Mr. Leandro Tomas from UPPAF Respond, to Pam Carbonell of the Center for Local and Constitutional Reform, and to all of the colleagues from the Interagency Task Force on Constitutional Reform who are present today. Batiin ko rin po ang mga kasamahan natin from the CRC of UAP. Tama ba, Remy? You're part of UAP, no?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. From Sensei, from the Development Academy of the Philippines Graduate School, from the Philippine Political Science Association, and from Blueprint Philippines, the team of Iro Brillantes. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Hindi ko na po gagamitin yung aking slides and read a formal message. I just have a few brief remarks for this morning. Unang-una, nagpapasalamat po and congratulations to the House Committee on Constitutional Amendments for successfully defending on the floor the resolution of both houses number 2 the other day. So to Congressman Garbin and to all of your colleagues na defended that the resolution of both houses and the committee report, maraming salamat po from all of the advocates of constitutional reform in the country. We are one step closer to our dream of finally amending a single letter in the 1987 Constitution. Kung babalikan po natin ito, we are just descendants of a long list of people who have attempted to do this. No? From the time of President Ramos, through Pirma, meron din po economic amendments doon. To the time of President Estrada, yung Concord, and there even was a committee that was organized then, led by Chief Justice Narvasa, if I'm not mistaken. And then there were a series, even during the time of course, GMA and President Noynoy, because Speaker Belmonte was the first to propose this insertion of the phrase unless otherwise provided by law, no? And now under the presidency of Rodrigo Roa Duterte, through the leadership of Speaker Lord Alan Velasco, we have finally passed the resolution of both houses on second reading. At doon po sa mga nanood noong mga deliberations ng ating mababang kapulungan, napakabukas nung naging debate. Napakainit, bukas na bukas. It was very transparent. Wala pong pwede magsabi na railroad ito dahil it went through the proper process in the House of Representatives. In fact, noon pa pong huling kongreso, pinag-uusapan itong lahat ng ito, and we are just so glad that we are finally in this position. Now, I would expect Congressman Garbin sharing to us later on that before they adjourn Sinidia next week, they would have approved this on third reading. And I think that is really the target of the Speaker of the House of Representatives. The ball now goes to the Senate. At ang kami po sa DILG at lahat po ng kasapi sa IATF constitutional reform, and those who have been advocating for this from the very beginning, is appealing to the members of the Senate, no, to give this a chance, because this is something we need, especially at this time of pandemic. Lagi pong sinasabi na bakit natin pag-uusapan ito sa panahon ng pandemya? Precisely because of the pandemic, this has to be addressed now. Dahil nga po, we have had a very significant contraction of our economy. At yung inaantay natin na positive economic growth this year has not yet been realized. Our economy contracted by 4.5% in the first quarter. If we pass this and if we show to the foreign investors na the Philippines is once again open for business, this will have a significant impact on economic recovery. If not in the short term, it will have a significant impact in the long term. Lagi po nilang sinasabi, pinasa na ng Kongreso yung mga economic bills at nasa Senate na ito. Those economic bills will address our economic problems in the short term, But the constitutional reform, ito economic chacha, na sinusulong po ng ating mababang kapulungan will address our economic problems in the medium and the long term. So ito na po yung ambag natin sa ating bansa. Let's get this done and hopefully this Congress. Ngayon marami po ang trying to pinapangunahan po ang ating mga senador. No? Ang sinasabi nila na malamig daw ang ating mga senador dito sa topic na ito, no? Which I don't think so. Why? Maliwanag po yung sinabi ni Senate President Tito Soto, no, to CNN. At ang sabi niya, I don't think we have enough time as it is to take a quick look into the proposal. So si Senate President Soto was referring to a quick look before adjournment. And we are not expecting the senators to have a quick look next week. Of course, yun po yung sinasabi ni Senator. At sabi po niya, perhaps after the SONA, we can tackle the resolution. At yun naman po talaga yung expectation natin sa ating mga senador. No? That after the SONA, sa third regular session, the Senate has the entire third regular session to tackle this. Because ang plano naman po ng ating mga congressman led by Speaker Lord Alan Velasco and Congressman Garbin is to have this coincide with the 2022 national election. So ang pag-uusapan po natin ay panahon. The Senate President Tito Soto himself has said this. Perhaps after the SONA, we can tackle the resolution. And that is exactly the game plan. That is the appeal of the advocates for constitutional reform, that the Senate will take a look at this after the SONA. And again, nagkaroon na po ng sesyon, nagkaroon na po ng hearing ang Senado about this a few months ago, if I'm not mistaken, January or February. Nagkaroon na po sila ng isang hearing. So they can just call for 2 more hearings and then they can now pass this on to the plenary. And the details of this on how we are going to work this out through a constituent assembly and the required funding to call for a plebiscite to coincide with the 2022 national elections, I think will be discussed to us by the proponent himself, Chairman Garbin of the House Committee on Constitutional Amendments. So ako po, I'm very hopeful. I am very confident that this generation, tayo po, no? We the generation of Filipinos, right at this very moment, will rise up to the challenge and finally amend the economic provisions of the Constitution. And I think the members of Congress have proven that the purpose of this amendment, this entire process, is not political. It is economic. Kung titingnan po natin yung inaprobahan nila on second reading, there is nothing political there. If the objective is to find out what is the real intention of Congress, titingnan lang po ng ating mga kababayan ang lumabas na final text ng kanilang ginagawa, at doon po maliwanag na ang dayunin nitong ating sinusulong ay para maibsan ang nararamdaman ng ating mga kababayan economically sa panahon ng pandemya and to ensure the country's full recovery from the pandemic. Yun lamang po at marami po salamat.
All right. Thank you very much, Usec Malaya, for your opening remarks. I've just been informed that we have some additional guests we'd like to greet. Unfortunately, I have not been informed of all their respective cities and municipalities, but we have a number of heads of the LGUs from which they come. Let me just greet Sir Motalib Dimaporo, Renante Inocando, Randy Macapil, Leo John Farales, Samson Duman Hug, Helenio Abesio, and Vice Mayor Loreto Acharon. Once again, thank you, Usec Malaya, for that very interesting introduction, updating us on things that have been happening lately. Uh, Now let's move on to hearing an opening message from Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung Philippines, one of our partners for this series of economic fora and a longtime partner of the DILG. Here to speak on behalf of KAS Philippines is Senior Program Manager Ms. Tonette De Jesus.
Thanks so much, Remy. Good morning to our speakers, distinguished guests, and friends who are joining us for this very important webinar on opening up the economy and its impact on jobs and the labor sector under the Department of the Interior and Local Government, or DILG's Foreign Direct Investments and the Economic Amendments on the 1987 Constitution Series of Economic Fora. On behalf of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, or CAS Philippines, I would like to thank the DILG for organizing this forum. Thank you to the office of John Malaya. Hi to the ever busy John. We haven't seen each other in so long, but I hope you and your loved ones are doing well. And also thank you to Professor Eric, Pam, and Alan for leading this effort. I'd like to note that it has been very unsettling for me that I am giving a message for a DILG CAS event without having Professor Alfred Soretta with us. Throughout almost all DILG CAS events that I have participated in, Professor Alfred was always such a bright, engaging, and joyful presence. Since I was unable to do so during the first webinar of this fora, I'd like to say that we gravely feel the loss of Professor Alfred. I am hopeful that through this series of fora and the other initiatives that the DILG has with CAS this year and beyond, we are somehow keeping Professor Alfred's vision alive. I'd also like to thank the upcoming speakers, the Department of Labor and Employment Secretary Silvestre Bello III, Congressman Alfredo Garbin Jr., and the University of the Philippines Public Administration Research and Extension Services Foundation's Mr. Leandro Tomas, as well as our moderator from the Center for Research and Communication, Mr. Remy De Leon. And of course, I'd also like to thank Jerome Hobna of CAS Philippines for coordinating with the DILG. Let me start this message by focusing on the strain of the push and pull that we've all been experiencing during this more than a year-long pandemic. In our new normal day-to-day lives, we're faced with choices that used to be no-brainers for us. Whether it's staying at home and ordering groceries online, which is safer, albeit more limited and costlier, or going out to the supermarket, which has more options and is more affordable, but we run the risk of getting COVID-19 within an enclosed space and with more people. Or whether it's booking a more expensive rideshare to go to work, since COVID-19 transmission is less likely, versus taking a more affordable train or bus ride with a higher risk of getting COVID-19 due to the crowd, ventilation, etc. So every day since the start of the pandemic, I think there seems to be such a weight to each and every choice, every decision, every action that we make. For now, I think that there's no other choice but to take a risk in order to accomplish our intended goals, but to still strive to the best of our abilities to minimize these risks as much as possible, while seriously cataloging our resources, whether fiscally, financially, even mentally. And I think this is a similar case for opening up the Philippine economy. So as we are progressively opening up our economy, I do have a couple of questions on its impacts on jobs and the labor sector that I hope our resource persons and speakers can address today. Number one, according to the International Monetary Fund, or IMF's World Economic Outlook released in April 2021, the Philippines' unemployment rate in 2020 was 10.4%, the highest for all of Asia and Pacific economies. Projections for 2021 and 2022 ease to 7.4% and 6.3% respectively, but is still the highest among the other economies. With these, what are the plans of national and local governments to further ease unemployment in the country amidst the pandemic? Number two, are there potential amendments to the economic provisions of the Constitution that can help sliding employment and incomes? Number three, and lastly, what are the new opportunities for the labor sector in this new environment? Are there possibly innovative ways to boost job and skills? And with that, I am very much looking forward to the presentations and the open forum. On behalf of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, or CAS Philippines, thank you so much for your kind attention and good morning.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Tonette, for that interesting welcome to our panel and our participants. Hopefully, we'll get to your questions. Well, not me, the panelists, of course. We'll get to your questions during their talks. We do hope Professor Alfred is smiling down on us as we have our discussions. Now, of course, our topic for today is labor, and we can't have a discussion about labor without hearing some words from the cabinet secretary in charge of it. He has shared a video message for us all this morning. Without further ado, Department of Labor and Employment Secretary, Honorable Silvestre Bello III.
Greetings to our partners in DILG, other co-workers in government, guests, ladies and gentlemen, a good day to everyone. I am indeed grateful to be part of this important meeting. Last year, we have seen how the COVID-19 pandemic brought our economy down on its knees. Many businesses were either temporarily shut or had totally ceased operations, spawned by restrictions imposed by government, pushing unemployment to its highest level. After months of lockdown, we have taken steps for the safe and gradual reopening of our economy. We have seen progress in addressing the unemployment rate and creating more opportunities for labor participation across all sectors. We do this while strictly observing the minimum health protocols in all workplaces. But fresh surge in the number of COVID cases necessitated another round of restriction on social and economic activities. This is why we are recording additional enterprises resorting to retrenchments or layoffs of their employees. For the longest time, we have always been last to get foreign direct investment due to restrictive provisions in our Constitution. We are touted to have one of Asia's toughest foreign investment rules. It is high time that we revisit such provision in order to accelerate economic growth and facilitate job creation, especially during this lingering pandemic. It's no doubt that the country remains an appealing destination for foreign investments. Foreign investors are attracted to our dedicated free trade zone, a relatively large domestic market, and a well-educated workforce as compared to our neighbors. Reforms therefore have to address investment constraints and enhance doing business are a big step to revive our economy. In this manner, we attract greater volumes of foreign direct investment in which we would lead to the creation of more jobs. As an institution mandated to promote gainful employment, protect workers, and promote their welfare, the Department of Labor and Employment takes active role in safeguarding the rights of all our workers. We craft policies that cater to the fulfillment of our tasks, including the promotion of social justice. We enjoin everyone, therefore, to actively participate in the discussions and contribute valuable knowledge in evaluating this initiative. Let us unite and commit ourselves as we create economic opportunities for our people based on freedom of initiative and self-reliance in the promotion of social justice. Patuloy tayong magkaisa at magsumikap para sa ating bansa. Sama-sama nating itaguyod ang pag-unlad ng ating bansa. Maraming salamat po.
Hello. All right. Had a little bit of technical difficulty there. We'd like to move on a bit with a poll. We'd like to find out what our audience members are thinking. And I believe the poll is now ready. The first poll is now ready for us to put up on the screen. Uh, although I don't quite see it yet. There we go. The question for the poll is, which two agencies are the primary implementers of the Philippines labor laws? So it's a bit of a quiz. The DOLE and POEA, the NEDA and POEA, the DOLE and TESDA, or the DOLE and CHR. Now just click the appropriate answer and let's see how many of us get the answer to these questions correct. And of course, the DOLE is the Department of Labor and Employment. The POEA is the Philippine Overseas Employment Agency. The test, we all know what the TESTA is, and the CHR is the Commission on Human Rights. I wonder how our poll numbers are doing. This is a bit of a Civica and Cultura question for all of you. Uh, it might have been a while. And we have our results. Most of us got the answer correct. 8% said DOLE and CHR. 12% said DOLE and TESTA. Only 2% said NEDA was involved. But the answer, of course, is DOLE and POEA. They are the ones who are in charge of implementing the Philippines labor laws. The NEDA is mostly on a policy level. All right, that was interesting. Now we come to the most essential part of the session, actually. We'll hear the latest updates and developments on the ongoing legislative agenda to amend the economic provisions of the 1987 Constitution. Our guest is currently working on the passage of the Reduced Optimal Retirement Act and the resolution of both houses, number two, on the amendment of the economic provisions of the constitutions. And we heard about the floor interpolation from uh, Usec Malaya earlier. He was managing partner at Cañares, Garbin, Buban, and Inson law offices from 2002 through 2004. City councilor for the city of Legazpi from 2004 through 2010, and a member of the 15th Congress from 2010 to 2013. He is now vice chairperson of the House Committee on Justice, as well as a member of the House Committees on Agrarian Reform, Dangerous Drugs, Good Government and Public Accountability, Health, Labor and Employment, Legislative Franchises, Natural Resources, Tourism, Trade and Industry, and Transportation, as well as the House Ways and Means Committee. He is also working on other legislation, including the Free Irrigation Service Act, the Philippine National ID System, the Anti-Hazing Act, the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act, and the Anti-Bullying Act. So he's got a lot on his plate. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, ako Bicol Party List Representative and Chairman of the House Committee on Constitutional Amendments in the 18th Congress, Honorable Alfredo A. Garbin Jr.
Thank you and good morning to all of you. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. I hope that I am being heard loud and clear. And to the organizers of this economic fora, to my friend, fellow Oragon, Usec Malaya, whom I consider a true friend and an ally in the pursuit of a better business environment in the Philippines. and to everyone in attendance, sa lahat po ng Chief Executive, local Chief Executive, alam ko po maraming mayors tayo ngayon, and to those from the academe, good morning to all of you. Foremost, thank you for inviting me to speak before you today on an issue that I feel so important, not only for the business sector, but for the entire Filipino people. The 1987 Constitution was adopted by the Filipino people 34 years ago. And this is the constitution of which the Filipinos bound to obey and respect and dutifully protect. However, as a lawyer and as a member now of the 18th Congress and the chair of the Committee on Constitutional Amendment, I've learned that susceptible to change is one of the hallmarks of an ideal constitution, because they are not an instrument of, they are not infallible instrument of manifest destiny. And no matter how we want them to be stable, they cannot stand still, but has to bend to the needs of the present time. Now, thus I take this opportunity to express my gratitude to the DILG, to all the organizers of this economic fora, for expressing its support in the effort to change some of the provisions in the Philippine Constitution, which, according to the authorities, need change for the betterment of the Filipino people. The country's economic monitors, the business community, and the academicians have told us the same story. The country is lagging behind when it comes to foreign direct investment. And more importantly, they exhibited the country's potential for growth in more conducive business setting. Now, there's no dispute that many jobs have been lost and are in danger of being lost because of the COVID pandemic. There's also no dispute that all industries need capital infusion to survive in the short term and to grow in the long term. While it is helpful in addressing the effects of the COVID pandemic, it is not only reactionary action to COVID, but is actually something the country needed years back. In the House of Representatives, where I chaired the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, the initiative to amend the Constitution by giving the government or the Congress the flexibility to open up the economy is embodied in RBH 2, or resolution of both houses number 2, that seek to insert the phrase "unless otherwise provided by law" the specific provisions of the Constitution, namely 5 amendments to Article 12, which speaks of the national patrimony and economy, 1 amendment to Article 14, which speaks to education, science, and technology, and 1 amendment to Article 16, the general provisions. There have been 9 committee meetings where RBH was deliberated. 3 meetings were held with other measures, and 2 out-of-town consultations, and 3 meetings exclusively for RBH 2. Out of these in-house and regional consultations, the committee endeavored to invite all sectors of society, from civil society groups, the academe, the legal luminaries, political scientists, economists, business groups, to pertinent government agencies and some policy research institutions. These same groups were also consulted in the previous Congresses. In fact, the DILG, spearheaded by Usec Malaya, was able to present almost 600,000 signature. And had it not been for this pandemic, siguro baka naka-kolekta sila ng more than 1 million signature. In the 18th Congress alone, more than 50 individuals and organizations were consulted on amendments to the economic provisions in the Constitution, voting 64 with 3 in the negative and 3 in the abstention. The House on Constitutional Amendments adopted RBH 2 with modification by excluding the proposed amendment on the conveyances of private lands. At present, RBH 2 was approved on second reading last Wednesday, and Undersecretary Usec Malaya is correct that this will be put to a vote on third reading before we adjourn Senate. Now, as to whether Senate has the time to deliberate on this, yes, Senate has enough time to deliberate on this when the third regular session opens. We, as member of Congress, has the constitutional duty to push for the needed constitutional reform since that power was given to us by the sovereign Filipino people. It is too big to ignore the data and economic literatures presented to us by expert and international organizations such as the OECD, the World Bank, the IMF, that the continued existence of the constitutional restriction of foreign equity resulted into foregone foreign direct investment. Gross capital formations contracted by 18.3% in the first quarter. And passing this economic chacha would allow for the inflow of more foreign capital and encourage investment across sectors. And this would facilitate the greater firm productivity in the transfer of skills and technology. So putting us in a better position to sustain a long-term growth. So if you will allow me to present a few of my slides as presently crafted, it must be supported if my my staff, yes, there, yeah. These are the facts and figures and the projections on resolution of both houses number 2. Next slide, please. Now, the objective of the RBH2 is to bring improvement to the quality of life by encouraging more investment that will create more jobs for our people, to maximize our economic momentum in order to fully transform economic growth into inclusive and solidary progress by removing the restrictive economic provisions in the Constitution which hamper the flow of foreign capital investment, and to promote an environment that will ensure prosperity through policies that promote economic growth and inclusive development by opening up economy for more foreign investment. Next slide, please. Now, this is our ranking in various world rankings when it comes to the best practices. As you can see, saan ba tayo dyan? Hindi ko makita yung Philippines. Saan ba tayo? But yes, okay. We go to the next slide. The economy in 2020. Now we have 119,000 or almost 120,000 that business that had closed, and the GDP growth in 2020 is negative 9.5%. The underemployment rate reached to 14.4%, and the unemployment rate is 8.7%. We have a budget deficit of almost 48% and a job losses of 4.5 million percent. This quarter alone, we have an economic contraction of 4.2%. And mas lalong kinakabahan tayo kasi an economic contraction of 4.2% this first quarter of the year means more business will be closing and more jobs and unemployment rate will be rising. And so we really need that a new capital formation. And one way of doing it is really opening up the economy to foreign direct investment. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, the country's gross capital formation as percentage of the gross domestic product from 2020 to 2019 has been among the lowest. So hindi nakakapagtaka dahil kulang na kulang nga pumapasok ng foreign direct investment sa atin. And it's always been correlated to the existence of the restrictive economic provisions in the Constitution, wherein investors would always say, why would we put our capital in the Philippines where our management control is only limited to 40%, unlike in other jurisdictions such as Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, where they offer 100% management control when they put up their own business or company. So dito, we only have, if I'm not mistaken, tayo ang pinakamababa in the region pagdating sa capital accumulations. Next slide, please. And the Philippine market are so concentrated. Why? Because the restrictive economic provision resulted into monopoly and oligopoly. Dito nag-enjoy yung mga oligarchs because they are protected by the Constitution. Pag may pumapasok na negosyo, syempre, nakikipag-partner lang sa kanila yung mga dayuhang nangangapital, and 60% of the capital are always reserved, always in favor of the domestic capital, which is also scarce and cannot provide capital accumulations. We are a country of scarce capital, but of abundant labor. And so, dito, yung Philippine markets, sabi nila, katiting, very concentrated, mabibilang mo lang sa nagkakailang pamilya ang malalaking industriya hawak nila. Can you please we go to the other slide? Now, the employment situation. The employment situation is that our total labor force is 74.3 million. This was given to us by the PSA 2020 statistics. Labor force participation is 58.7%. I mentioned earlier, an underemployment rate is 14.4%, which is 6.28 million, and the unemployment rate as of 2020 is 8.7%. Next slide, please. Which sectors are Filipinos employed? Now, a big part of employment in the industry sector is in the manufacturing and in the construction. Now, more than half of our labor force are employed in the service sector, and they depend greatly on the operations and viability of businesses, and many of which did not survive due to the pandemic because of slim capital. Next slide, please. So how many jobs do we need to generate? Now, using the conservative Philippine Statistics Authority estimates, there will be an average increase or new entrants to the labor force population from 2021 to 2025. With the current labor force participation rate of 58.7%, we projected an average of 578,000 additional Filipinos looking for work from 2021 to say 2025. Next slide, please. So what will happen if we have a surplus in labor? Obviously, when you have more people looking for work from very few available employment opportunities, wages will tend to be lower, and businesses will be able to pay lower wages, and people desperately needing jobs will be forced to accept lower wages. Next slide, please. So FDI can address our oversupply of labor. As I said earlier, we are a country of scarce capital but of abundant labor. Kaya nga, padala tayo ng padala ng OFW abroad. So the increased yield in FDI yields positive effects on labor markets of host countries because FDI brings capital and technology to target firms, industries, and locations. availability of capital and technology increases demand for labor. Increase in demand for labor improves labor force composition, overall employment, average productivity, wage levels, and lowers wage inequality. And the current domestic market, greatly restricted to the ownership of Filipinos, is not big enough to generate jobs needed by millions in the labor force. Next slide, please. Next slide. How open is the Philippines to foreign investment? Doon tayo sa slide na yun. How open is the Philippines? Yan, okay. Makita po nyo dito kung gaano tayo ka-open sa foreign investment pagdating sa ibang sektor ng ating ekonomiya. In the area of national patrimony, especially in the areas of mining, gas and oil and agricultural forestry, 40% lang po ang foreign equity participation as compared to Singapore, 100%, Vietnam, 50%, Thailand, 49%, Malaysia, 70%, Indonesia, 97%, Cambodia, 100%. On the average, doon sa national patrimony, on the average, o nag-average po ang ating karatig bansa ng 72 to 78% open to that sectors of that economy. Kaya marami po ang pumapasok sa kanilang investor. On the area of telecom, obviously we have a duopoly right now because our telecom industry, the foreign equity participation is only limited to 40%. Unlike yung ating katabing bansa like Singapore, they are open 100% to telecom, and so they have a better services when it comes to telecom, better internet connectivity, better service, and that resulted to a lower price para sa kanilang mga consumers o kanilang citizens. Thailand also is 87.3%, Vietnam is 75%, Malaysia is 100%, Indonesia is 68%, Cambodia is 100%. So dito ho talagang kulelat na kulelat tayo pagdating sa telecom. Light and manufacturing, 75%. Electricity, na kung saan even with the EPIRA, which we consider as a failure, 65.7% ang ating foreign equity participation. Samantalang sa Singapore, 100. Of course, Thailand mas lower sa atin. But on the average, sa ating karatig na bansa, 80.3% ang foreign equity participation. Another sector which has been, we have been lagging behind is the transport sector. Ang transportation po natin, 40% lang ang foreign equity participation, and there's no wonder that we cannot expect that investors would come in and invest a huge capital for the transport because pinapayagan lang natin ay 40% ng kanilang partisipasyon. And sa media, zero. And that's why one of the issue in the closure of ABS-CBN is the foreign depositary receipt. But the present reality is that bakit pa natin ito bibigyan ng pagbabawal samantalang pumunta ka sa mga stand ng malls, groceries, foreign publications are being sold. In fact, in the cable, CNN are there, BBC, Al Jazeera, all foreign channels are there. And so yung sentimento 34 years ago ng ating framers of the Constitution na sabi nila Filipinos might be influenced because of the entry of foreign media. Wala na po yun because ang media ngayon, ang medium ngayon na ginagamit natin is borderless na because of the globalization and of course because of the IT that is being now present in that platform. In the construction and retail, 100%, healthcare and waste management, 100% po yung ating foreign equity participation, and that's why in the manufacturing and retail, marami po tayong nabibigay na trabaho dyan. So, next slide please. The country's restrictiveness and FDI versus ASEAN. Ito po yung pag-aaral ng organizations of economic cooperation development at the World Bank. We are the most restrictive economy in the ASEAN. And the result is Vietnam and Indonesia, countries with a relatively young population such as ours, have already surpassed the Philippines with regards to foreign direct investment net inflow. So yan po, base ito sa pag-aaral ng OECD na kung saan one of the international organizations that give us data on how we are lagging behind foreign direct investment due to the presence of the restrictive economic provisions in the Constitution. Next slide, please. And this is the restrictiveness FDI net inflow. Talagang obvious, tayo ay kulelat. Next slide, please. How will RBH2 impact the Philippine economy? And this was presented by Representative Joey Salceda, one of the co-sponsor of RBH2, wherein if ever we will approve the RBH2, the lifting of the restrictive economic provisions in the Constitution this year and will be ratified by the Filipino people in a plebiscite called for that purpose. This is the potential. On the average, it will create at least 660,000 jobs or 661,000 jobs annually by opening up or easing the foreign equity restriction. Next slide, please. Now, marami nagtatanong, solusyon ba yan sa lahat ng problema? Hindi po. In fact, FDI is not a panacea, but a necessary catalyst. FDI is a very useful catalyst for kickstarting an economy which does not have enough domestic capability to jumpstart job creation in industries and starting new types of economic activities. When there is mass unemployment, openness to FDI jumpstart job creation process. The availability of jobs and the presence of variety of leads to people being able to specialize in what they do best and thereby increases efficiency and productivity. Increase in FDI likewise leads to improvement of practices from domestic firms as they will need to shape up to survive competition. Monopolies, duopolies, and oligopolies will be challenged and forced to provide the most affordable array of products and services. Consumers and the general public will have access to more options in the market, and the FDI addresses the issue of job availability, and through the competition it fosters, promotes the welfare of the general public. Next slide, please. And this, I think, the last slide. So the World Bank top 10 policy prescriptions, it was highlighted, one of which is reduce restriction on foreign investors. Example, allow foreign competition in sectors and reduce equity limits. Kanina, prinsinta ko po yung equity limits when it comes to FDI, talagang nakapalaman sa ating constitutions. Our hands are tied, nakagapos po yung ating mga kamay, our policy makers, nakagapos din po yung kanilang mga kamay. And so what we need is really to support this endeavor to introduce a meaningful reform in the Constitution. Umpisa po tayo dito by easing the foreign equity restriction. And kami po, tatapusin namin po ito, commitment ni Speaker and as Chair of your the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, we will put it in a vote on third reading and we will transmit it to the Senate. The Senate has now the ball. Nandiyan ho yung kanilang obligasyon to look into this meaningful constitutional reform. It is too big to ignore because for the past 34 years, it resulted into forgone investment. And lalong-lalo na ho ngayong pandemya, we need a capital formation. And by opening up the economy, it will contribute to slowly stimulate the economy by providing more investment, providing more capital that will bring about technology, managerial expertise, and of course, the much needed employment by millions of the Filipino people. So salamat po sa pagbigay ng oportunidad ngayon at kagalakan ko po na makapag-share ng ating views nitong economic chat. Thank you and magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat.
All right. Maraming salamat po, Honorable Alfredo Garbin Jr. And actually, the next thing we have is once again a poll to see how everyone is feeling after everything that Chairman Garbin has said. This is an interesting question to ask. It should be on your screen now. Do you feel that existing labor laws offer sufficient worker protections if constitutional amendments which restrict foreign ownership are relaxed? So, do you feel that existing labor laws offer sufficient worker protections in the case that constitutional amendments which restrict foreign ownership are relaxed? It's a multiple choice question, but it's just yes or no. And as we wait for everyone's answers, we are beginning to see questions on the various Facebook Live pages, particularly the CRC page, which is very active. Also, we got a bunch of questions on the Zoom chat. Rest assured that we are taking note of your questions and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible during the open forum. Meanwhile, I'm also told that we have a bunch of LGU heads, also mayors of cities and municipalities that have just joined us. We'd like to welcome LGU head Mayor Randolph Ang of Dimiao, Raymond Malapajo of Maayon, Ambrosio Cruz of Giginto, Bulacan, Leo Bringas of Cabangan, Zambales, Crisanto Mondano of Mainit, and Farhani Tawan of Salvador, as well as Darwin Estranero of Tabuk City. We'd also like to acknowledge Regional Director Lilibet Famashon of DILG Caraga. And I'm not sure if we have, oh, there we go. We already have our poll results. Do you feel that existing labor laws offer sufficient worker protections if constitutional amendments which restrict foreign ownership are relaxed? We have interesting results here. 54% say no and 46% say yes. So maybe that's a thing that we can address perhaps in later fora and perhaps in the Q&A later. Let's see. I see a bunch of questions in the various Facebook Live venues like CRC and DILG and Core where they're asking about that particular question. In the meantime, let's move on. Our next speaker is currently the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Officer of the UPPAF Regulatory Support Program for National Development, or RESPOND. He has more than 15 years of experience in the monitoring and evaluation role in USAID-funded projects on fiscal policy and planning, corruption and governance, national competitiveness, ease of doing business, and regulatory governance. He has co-authored the National Competitive Roadmaps for the construction sector and the iron and steel industry, as well as policy papers on VAT and the train law, among others. Currently a PhD candidate and a lecturer for the School of Economics of the University of Asia and the Pacific. He holds a Master of Science degree in Industrial Economics from UANP. Let us all please give a warm welcome to Mr. Leandro Tomas D.
Thank you, Remy. Wait, I, my PowerPoint won't work. Is it possible for, can you operate it instead?
Yes, sir. We will try. It's on your screen, sir.
Oh, let me see it. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Remy, for the kind introduction. Greetings to DLG's Undersecretary Jonathan Malaya, also Miss Antoinette De Jesus of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, Philippines, and the Honorable Congressman Alfredo Garbin Jr. Greetings to all the online viewers of this economic fora for opening up the economy and its impact on jobs and the labor sector. Mind you, however, in my presentation today, the keyword is potential. In as much as I'll be showing you some results of a working paper that are still pretty much not final and subject to further revisions and studies. Okay, so next slide, please. So to begin, no, well, this is already mentioned in part by the Congressman Garbin. To begin, no, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the Philippine economy experienced an impressive 5-year run of up to 2019 with an average GDP growth rate of 6.6% that was only second highest to Vietnam. This positive trend has unfortunately been overtaken by the COVID pandemic with the ensuing health crisis, the subsequent economic lockdown measures that reduced mobility of transport and labor that effectively closed down trade and markets and thereby ushering in a global recession. All these factors and more led to the Philippine economy contract by 9.6% in 2020, the steepest decline among the ASEAN 6 nations, seen here. And unfortunately, the negative trend persists into the first quarter of 2021, even as our neighbors are nearing positive growth territory. So as you can see there, right, Singapore is already positive, Vietnam is already 4.5% for the quarter, and the rest are below single digit in negative GDP growth. While the economic recession in the Philippines continues with the contraction of economic activity persisting, as you can see here in consumption, down 9%, exports down 17.5%, imports down 20%, and most troubling, investments down 36%. These numbers are based on a four quarter, no? Annualized into a moving four quarter weighted moving average. The only bright spot, as you can see here by the yellow line, is the remaining driver of positive economic growth, which is government spending, which has risen by 10.5% in 2020 and 16% in the first quarter of 2021. But let us remember that the government sector comprises only 15% of GDP. Therefore, it can't be expected to prime the economy uh, out of this lingering recession by itself, uh, even if you consider fiscal multipliers, because the hole is so much deeper than a normal recession. As stated earlier, the most glaring decline uh, concerns investments, which has fallen close to 40% in value in the last four quarters up to March 2021. The continuing fall in the demand components of GDP shows the inherent difficulty, of course, in steering the economy back on track when a lot of its moving parts are not only moving in the wrong direction, but are actually intertwined altogether. So much so that with these macroeconomic realities in mind, the national government's target of 6.5 to 7.5 real GDP growth for 2021, set as recently as December 2020, appears to be in need of a downward revision sooner. Next slide, please. Uh, we already stated that government is the only remaining driver of economic growth. However, the escalation of government spending to combat the COVID has widened the national government fiscal deficit to record levels. In fact, the level of most recent is that it already reached 7.6% of GDP, or double of 2019, as seen by the red line. The good news is that 7.6% of GDP figure, fine, 7.6%, is actually lower than what government projected. No? Government in mid 2020 was projecting that the deficit would actually reach 9.6%. So count our blessings, it's actually much lower than we expected, but it's still 7.6. The reason why it's lower than the projections is government revenues actually increased, no? As reflected in the on the right side on the blue line, the revenue effort, as BIR identified its tax collection activities, no, to the tune of 14% GDP, which is noteworthy because it is the same level as 2018. But of course, this year BIR was operating under COVID. So in the revenue effort is actually impressive. uh, It reflects precisely that BAR managed to overcollect more than 265 billion or 15% above its target for 2020. Of course, it's revised downward during COVID. Well, that's the good news. The bad news is that at 7.6% GDP, the deficit, no, that level as you can see by the red line, is so much higher than what the previous highs of 3.6, yeah, of 3.6, no, close to 4%, which triggered the last fiscal crisis we had in the early 2000s. At that time, right, the in that fiscal crisis, uh, our uh, what we did in response was what? The subsequent expansion of the EVAT to keep the country off spiraling, downward spiraling public debt spiral. So that fiscal nightmare, which we went through before, and which we avoided because of EVAT and other revenue measures, is now facing us once again. So again, the key word is potentially. It's facing us once again. More so because now, what revenue expenditure growth are getting close to operational limits. Already, public debt has risen from 40% of GDP before COVID, no? And we are, as you can see on the right side, the black line going down, right? National government debt as percent of GDP, right? We were so delighted precisely that public debt of GDP fell already. Before it, we was as high as 70%. So much so that we went down to 40%. But because of pandemic, guess what? We are now again at 60%. Well, good news is it's still below the 70% in the last fiscal crisis, but it's rising up there. No? The serving of this public debt, however, remains relatively manageable yet. Why? Because interest payments so far only comprise 12.4% of government expenditures, as seen by the violet line, no, on the right side. So it's actually still very low, at 12.4% of government revenues. This, which is far from the 30% levels. Again, no, interest payments comprising 30% of government expenditures in the early 2000s. Nevertheless, it's becoming increasingly apparent that government is approaching the limits of its fiscal space in addressing and containing COVID, with leftover resources that are clearly insufficient to jumpstart the economy back to life on its own. Okay, next slide, please. Now, the decline in real GDP, as mentioned in the earlier slides, of course, translates also to a decrease in output, which has happened in most production sectors, as seen in the left table. Of course, with the sole exceptions of the ICT and finance, which concerns activities that are in the digital realm, right? Not in the physical world of lockdowns. Among the most notable sectors hard hit by the COVID are, as can see here, the red lines, it's continuing into the quarter, right? Our services, tourism, construction, transportation, business services, domestic trade. Uh, There is apparently good news in that manufacturing has recovered in the quarter, right? You see there a 0.05% increase. These are all real GDP growth rates, not to post a positive gain in the quarter. But however, uh, future growth for manufacturing remains in question because, as seen in the upper right, leading indicators such as the value and volume of production index are still negative. Now, the fall in consumption, investments, and exports at the national level are now being felt, no, at the microeconomic level. As more businesses identify the lack of demand, as seen here in the table on the right side, this is a survey of the BSP Business Expectation Survey. Where respondents were asked, what is the overriding business constraint that you have? So the numbers there are percent of total respondents, and top of that is that's it. Businesses report that it's the lack of demand as the primary business constraint, of course, apart from COVID. Uh, this is what this mention of what pertains of depressed markets, right? Why? Because depressed markets have also brought on increased competition, right? That's why in the second constraint, it is competition. Businesses are concerned with competition. Why? Because now, what industry players, the same industry players, are operating or are already operating at under capacity, no? As seen here in the capacity utilization, uh, uh, it's now 70%, whereas before it was at 75%. So again, businesses are operating at under capacity while they're competing to maintain, if not increase market share over a shrinking customer base. As mentioned earlier, consumption is falling. It's negative. Also, of particular interest is the not insignificant number of businesses who are also cited, no, in the table, who also cited unclear economic laws and lack of material inputs as perceived barriers to growth, which brings us to the next topic. Next slide, please. And the topic concerns of supply side constraints. This was also touched on already by Congressman Garbin, but again, I'm just going to stress it again. The topics is with regard to supply side constraints, particularly the lack of gross capital formation or investment flows. Case in point, for example, it took us 26 years from 1993 to 2018 to match the pace of Vietnam on investment generation. Uh, you can actually see it in the slide of the congressman, where you saw there what Vietnam's gross capital formation as a percentage of GDP is higher than 26 is up, no, 26 plus percent GDP and up. But as can be seen though in the present scenario, we matched it. We actually matched it in 2017, 2018, but of course in 2020, well, again, we have fallen now below 20% levels. And it's the same for the first quarter. Now, the fruits of this, why are we want to compare ourselves with Vietnam? Well, the point is this: the fruits of, Vietnam's experience in attracting FDIs can be seen in that what the GNI per capita of Vietnam, which was half half of the Philippines in 2011, is now at 67% of the Philippines due to investment-led growth in Vietnam. No? So much so that if the present trend, continues, but most likely Vietnam will match our GNI per capita in 2028. And that scenario, that projection is based on pre-COVID, before COVID data. And as seen in the earlier slides, no, we're in the negative GDP growth, whereas uh, Vietnam is positive and is in fact now thriving under COVID. So with that, it's what the likelihood that the milestone event of us being overtaken by Vietnam on average living standards will occur maybe even earlier than 2028. Now, this projection is also reinforced, no? This negative view, no? Constraints of supply side is reinforced by the emergence of risks to the future capacity of the economy to provide sustained investment-led growth. What, why? Because here on the right side, we see precisely investments in durable equipment are still down. Right? While imports of capital goods and raw materials and intermediate goods have rebounded in the last quarter, albeit no, it's coming from a low base. No? Importation of fuels are still in decline, in line with travel restrictions under COVID. But the posting of positive gains here for this quarter doesn't mean we are out of the woods yet, as these trends can turn on a dime if, for example, succeeding waves of COVID infections and lockdowns reemerge. Yes. Uh, Next slide, please. And so, what since we have a problem of a lack of investments, one possible source, no, alternate source, of course, is to attract capital from abroad in the form of foreign direct investments or FDIs. However, the global recession arising from COVID has also led to the tightening of global FDI flows, which has fallen by 42% in 2020. The hardest hit are developed countries, as you see here, no, developed countries, where FDI flows are at 25-year lows. In fact, the levels that they see here, according to UNCTAD, are one third of the low point after the global financial crisis in 2009. FDI into the ASEAN actually contracted by 31%, with a significant slowdown of our merger and acquisition activity of up to 86%, 86% down in Singapore as investors hunker down to wait out the storm. Projections from UNCTAD show a further 5 to 10% slide in 2021. As investor uncertainty surrounding COVID will continue to affect FDI, yes, as any FDI recovery is not expected to start before 2022. Okay, next slide, please. Now, the news of a slowdown in global FDI, as seen in the previous slide, no, can, however, be considered as less significant from the perspective of a small FDI market player like the Philippines. In our case, our FDI levels are, in a matter of speaking, so low that FDI in amounts that are small relative to global flows are big for us. So, to paraphrase, no, in a way, patingi-tingi lang tayo, tingi, tingi, tingi. We are not so for now, no, we are not really geared to conduct global FDI power plays of billion-dollar deals on a consistent level, at least not yet. So in a way, our smallness in the world of FDIs has allowed us, guess what, to post not only a positive growth. So as you can see here, no, in blue, for 2020, according to UNCTAD, we are the only country in the ASEAN which posted an increase in net FDIs. No? The only one with positive. Not only that, it's a whopping 28% increase. So yes, it's a question of it's advantage of playing in the small leagues, right? Of operating at a low base. Uh, in fact, it reminds me that in 2010, when our FDIs were at 1 billion, we were at a loss of trying to reclaim the 3 billion high that we reached 3 years before in 2007. So, well, our penchant for being thinking small was exposed when FDI reached, as you can see in the table at the top, no? When FDI reached 10 billion milestone in 2017 and 18. Yes, so we celebrated that milestone of attaining 10 billion FDI, but we forget that we are 10 years behind Vietnam because Vietnam did it 10 years earlier. Now, the wide gap in FDI inflows, no? As you can see, there's a wide gap because our market share of incoming at FDI is very low. Malaysia and Thailand actually are feeling are down now, but historically, they're also, of course, much higher than us before in terms of market share of FDI. The wide gap in FDI inflows, of course, presents an economic opportunity for the country. Why? Because from a low base, right, it's easier to enlarge our small FDI footprints, in attracting FDIs from multinational corporations in the process of decoupling from China. In 2019, our FDI from China amounted to 0.24%, as seen on the lower left table. Amounted to 0.24% of all the FDI outflows coming out of China. Case in point also, more recently, what as you can see there, the orange on the upper right, no, those are approved FDI in our investment promotion agencies, in our economic zones, approved FDI, no? Not yet actualized, but uh, the 2 billion, as you see there for 2020, the orange, no? Approved FDIs in 2020 amounted to 2 billion. And what? That is only 20% of the 10 billion in registered FDI into Vietnam in the first quarter of this year. So yeah, our what we collected in 1 year, yes, is 1/5 of what Vietnam collected in 1 quarter. So that goes to show you the scale of volumes involved. Okay. And how much how much potential it is out there, that we are sadly not taking full advantage of. And one of the reasons, precisely as mentioned by the Congressman Garbin, on why our FDI net FDI levels are so low is because, next slide please. Yes, FDI regulatory restrictions. As mentioned earlier by the Congressman, yes, the Philippines has the most restrictive regulations on FDI in the ASEAN 6. As seen here in the table on the right side, whereas the Congressman's slide was on ownership restrictions, these are the rankings of the subscores. Well, with respect, so it's not just the ownership restrictions; it can be other regulatory barriers. No, put it there. So what do we see here? Uh, as you can see, the country scores are what? Are in the red, are in the bottom third for most part. No, we're the most restricted. We're the bottom third. In fact, no. If you drill it down even further, what we are in the bottom 20% with respect to manufacturing, electronics, power generation, retail, and banking. We are in the bottom 10% with respect to construction and mobile telecoms. Of course, we will see if the recent granting of the permit to operate to Dito Telecommunity Corporation as the third telco operator by the president and the approval by Congress of its 25-year lease will be reflected in future versions of the RRL, of the Regulatory Restrictive Index of the OECD. But I just want to highlight again, no, that the presence of regulatory barriers to FDIs in the country as measured in the RRI is of course unfortunate, because why? Because these laws and regulations restrict FDIs. And I want to connect it to the statement from OECD. It restricts access to world-class services inputs through FDI that have shown to be crucial for moving manufacturing up the value chain and boosting growth and jobs in the services sector. Next slide, please. So now that we know that what one of the barriers to the incoming the entry of FDIs in the country is foreign equity restrictions, right? So now let's try to link precisely, no, FDIs and foreign equity restrictions. Now, in my study, no, I did an economic regression, no, to test the statistical relationship of the following explanatory variables on the left side. No. So of course, one of course is foreign equity restrictions, and I use the RRI subscore on foreign equity restrictions. And of course, it has a negative relationship to FDI because the more restrictions there are, the less FDI we expect to come in. Next factor is other regulatory restrictions, same relation to FDI, negative. Another variable that I tested is economic growth, of course, as measured by the real GDP growth rate. And of course, it has an expected relationship with FDI because the higher the economic growth, the more attractive the country is to FDIs. With regard to foreign exchange, it is a negative relation because as, what FDIs may want is a weaker currency so that they can when they convert the dollar denominated FDIs into pesos, they will get more. The other factor is competitiveness, and I used the World Economic Forum's global competitiveness country rank percentiles. No? And of course, it's positive. The more competitive a country is, the more FDIs are expected to come in. I also tried to measure investment risk. Um, uh, and this is, of course, in the form of investment credit ratings. And of course, it has a negative relation to FDIs. The higher the risk, the lower the rating, the lower expected FDI levels are. So in my model, I used the CN5 across CN5 countries and used data from 2003 to 2019. And as seen here, we got the model results, no? Whether those statistical relationships hold. No? Of the 6 identified factors, only 4 are deemed relevant with high statistical significance. So that's with foreign equity restrictions, other regulatory restrictions, economic growth, and competitiveness. The overall fit of the model for now can be considered as borderline acceptable, yes, but it can be made more robust upon further study. So now that we've established the statistical link between FDI and FER, foreign equity restrictions, then the effect of reducing the RRI score, because now, as you said, we have one of the highest RRI scores as a barrier among the ASEAN. Then if I reduce that score to 0, no, then it's one measure of attaining potential FDIs, which can be calculated. In this case, the number that I came up with is 16.2 billion in FDI. Of course, it assumes that all foreign equity restrictions are removed, 0. And this 16.2 billion does not include the other factors, no? For example, as mentioned here, the economic growth and competitiveness. Next slide, please. So now that we have a number of potential FDIs, no, of 16.2 billion dollars, now we can put it in the setting of the labor market. So I put here what the, the 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 labor market indicators with respect to labor force participation rate, unemployment rate, and unemployed. No? Now, as can be seen in the most recent data, dated March 2021, the situation in the labor market has improved considerably since the low point at the onset of the pandemic in April 2020, when the government imposed quarantine travel restrictions that prevented workers from going to work, while the economic lockdown put markets in stasis. At that point, labor force participation rate fell to 56%. The unemployment rose to 17.6%, and the number of unemployed more than tripled, no? From 2 million to upwards to 7 million. However, now, as can be seen by the March 2021 figures, the numbers of workers available for work has rebounded, no? Because of now we have a higher labor force participation rate. So the number of workers available for work has increased from 44.6 million in April. It's now up to 48.8 million in March 2021. The unemployment rate has been cut by 60%, which is 80% of the correction back to October 2019 levels. However, on the unemployment side, there remains 1.3 million workers that are still displaced from their jobs that they last held in October 2019. Because again, the number of unemployed now is 3.4 million. What 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 we're saying is a recovery from COVID. Then what the number of unemployed should be close to the 2 million. Okay, next slide, please. So now that we have the baseline setting, and then we have that number, the potential FDI of 16.2 billion, I I conducted an an analysis using the input output tables of PSA from 2012. So basically, my analysis, of course, is based on the the employment uh, structure of the economy in 2012. So first, as mentioned, no, we have a total of 16.2 billion in FDI. You can see there 16.16. And then what? I just had to get a profile of how to break that 16.6 down. So I used the sectoral structure of FDIs going into the country from 2016 to 2019. So here and then yeah, and then we computed the output and household incomes effects using multipliers. So in the end, um, the preliminary results from this analysis show that the country's economic and sorry the country's job market no will see an infusion uh, of as we see there of 1.6 no 1.579260 1.6 million new jobs no, arising from the FDI investments of 16.2 billion dollars. So that is the total employment generated. It has it includes the the direct effects, the indirect effects, all throughout the economy. So this new the the the, the additional 1.6 million new jobs will improve the unemployment rate, which is 7.1% in March now. It will go down to 3.8%. Of course, if this is in one go. No? But of course, you know naman that this cannot occur in one go. More so because FDI inflows when they touch the ground, you know, they require months, if not years. Maybe the first year in scoping and also going through the regulations of entry. Maybe the second, third years in setting up, etc. So it's not in one go. Now, of these 1.6 million jobs created, no, then I compared it to the net employment, the difference between October 2019 and March 2021. So already, you know, as seen, as per March 2021, we have an additional 2.8 million new jobs created. So it's not negative. So in that sense, we have already recovered in total, no, all the jobs lost since uh, 20 October 2019. According to this, the economy has already recovered all those jobs lost as a total, no, as a total. However, um, as can be seen here, there are some sectors that are still negative. They're still negative. For example, in manufacturing, yes. If you want to compare October 2019 and March 2021, there are still 86,000 jobs that are missing that were there in October 2019. Same with electricity, gas, and water. And given these job deficits, uh, then we can put in precisely, we can compare it to the new jobs generated by this, no? By the 1.6 million new jobs generated by the FDIs. So much so that what do we see here? Of those sectors which are negative, which are in red, no? The FDI flows will generate 438,000 new jobs in those sectors which are still in job undergoing job deficits. So these 438,000 are in sectors with job deficits, which will help reduce the 1.3 million workers that are still displaced from work between October 2019 and March 2021 to 579,000 for a recovery rate of 33%. What does that mean? Even after you put in the 1.6 million, there are still sectors which are still have a job deficit, and the total is 580,000. But what we see here is what in this slide is at the sector level, the job deficits in manufacturing 86,000, and electricity, gas, and water 9,800 are now completely gone because again, with the generation of new jobs with this FDI are sufficient to cover those deficits. So you have a recovery here of above 100% and above 100% for manufacturing and electricity, gas, and water. Next slide. To continue it down, the other sectors, no? You see that there are job deficits in real estate uh, of 45,000 will also be removed. Again, the job deficit in real estate will be removed because of an inflow of FDIs. However, job deficits in transport, public administration, education, and other services will be reduced but not completely eliminated. So they will still remain. So in summary, next slide, please. We said that what? First, the economy is in recession with government as the remaining driver. However, the higher levels of government spending, no, are producing record high fiscal deficits that is unsustainable with respect to the rising public debt. The lack of demand and underproduction also go hand in hand, right? Especially whether they're going up or down. So which makes it harder, no, for government to fix it by itself. So that's why reversing the negative GDP growth requires another driver, which in this case is investments. No? But as we see, however, investment levels are foreign to low levels that also risk future capacity of the economy. So again, as an alternate, why don't we go to global FDIs, FDIs? Uh, but global FDIs are in decline. But as we said earlier, this matters less for the Philippines because we're small anyway. What is more significant is the removal of restrictive laws and regulations that hinder FDI inflows into the country. And as a final summary, again, so therefore what? Removing foreign equity restrictions will yield a potential FDI of 16.2 billion. It will increase output by 1.4 trillion. It will generate 1.6 million new jobs. As a result of these new jobs, total family incomes will rise by 197 billion or around 8,000 per family. Unemployment rate will improve from 7.1 to 3.8%. And existing job deficits amounting to 141,000 in these sectors, manufacturing, electricity, gas, water, real estate, business services will be removed. While job deficits in transportation, public administration, education, and other services will be reduced by 390,000 or 33%. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Tan. I was particularly interested in the input-output analysis and its resulting sectoral breakdown. I will have to study that in much more depth later. Good memories from my macroeconomics class all those years ago.
Yeah.
Now, of course, though, we have to move on to the open forum, and I know everybody's excited. To our friends in the media, please let the team know if you have an on mic question, and we'll try to let you have audio access as quickly as possible. For our other participants on Zoom, if you haven't yet, simply write down your economics questions, your questions in the Zoom chat box. And those of you who are joining us via Facebook Live, do post your questions in the comments, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can within the allotted time. The thing is, there are already so many very interesting questions here, a lot of them very technical, in fact. This is going to be a fun little discussion. And I'd like to take this time to thank the behind the scenes team in advance. They'll be feeding me the questions via Messenger. Members of the press, yes, let us know if you have an on mic question. We will try to accommodate you as quickly as possible. Now, our first question is from a DTI and Small Business Corporation mentor and consultant via the Zoom chat. It's Sir Paulino Valenzuela from the Office of the Presidential Advisor on Entrepreneurship. And his question is, if we liberalize foreign investment entry, what is the state, high, lower average of readiness of LGUs where investors will locate in absorbing these investments? Do they have the quality of governance and expertise to deal with these investors, given existing rules and regulations and businesses and political environment in their respective areas? That's a very interesting question, given that we have a lot of mayors in the audience. It's not directed towards anyone specifically. So if any of our panelists want to answer this question, uh, uh, anyone?
Well, with regard to our eco zones, as mentioned, right, we have surplus capacity on that in attracting further FDIs. Of course, not by much, but it exists there. With regard to governance levels, well, that's also it's a work in progress, especially on the tracking of uh, foregone revenues. Yes, that's crucial, especially uh, with respect to the fiscal concerns of DOF.
With regard to our regulatory processes, of course, we always maintain that the playing level field is equal as of that of the domestic as well as foreign investors. In fact, the normal issue is whether um, they will be governed by our regulatory processes. Yes, start with um, the observance of labor standards, the environmental laws when it comes to mining, the exploration, development, and utilization of our natural resources. And as to the readiness, I think we are ready. Our regulatory processes and the different government agencies was primary jurisdiction to look into uh, how they will be governed by uh, our laws. They are there. The PESA, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and uh, it has always been our policy in the exchange of trade that we will observe equality and reciprocity as mandated by the Constitution. And in doing so, uh, nandun po yung pag-oobserba that uh, perhaps our regulatory laws are in favor of the Philippine industry, but it is not anti-alien. Okay, what is being prescribed is those unfair and foreign competition and trade practices. So yun po yung ating pinapaabot sa kanila.
Also, another factor worth considering is, of course, is the current efforts of the anti-red tape authority, right, to improve governance and with regard to regulations and cutting red tape, no? In streamlining processes in um, in strengthening ease of doing business in the country. So it's right there. The agenda to fix these governance concerns are there in the agenda of ARTA. Also, I forgot. Mind you, the this notion about FDIs, it it uh, it, it begs the question that actually FDIs are not even uh, uh, a target in our Philippine Development Plan.
That's interesting.
So maybe it's high time that we made it so, considering the so much potential that we can get out of it. I mean, if Vietnam is making hay doing it, uh, and and as I mentioned earlier, Vietnam is experiencing the fruits of it, and in a few short years, we will see it in our faces. You
All right. We actually got a lot of economics questions here. Uh, Miss Lorena Valerio and quite a few others in the chats asked very similar questions about GDP as the rationale for this change. So this goes down to very fundamental issues. Combining their questions, is FDI the lone solution to recover from economic distress? Please elaborate. And I think another way to phrase it uh, is GDP really the main measure we want to use? Surely a human development index is a more humanitarian measure. Uh, how would this kind of charter change that is being proposed affect that? Uh, Perhaps.
well,
Yeah.
can I take a stab at it? Uh, Again, when you talk about human development, sustainability goals, guess what? You still need the resources first for you to
Okay.
pursue those lofty goals. So to be blunt, no, government, as you said, now is severely constrained, no, with regard to the fiscal deficit. So we have to fix our macroeconomic house in order first. Then we can pursue those um, uh, goals further in the future. Thank you.
Well, the reality is that there is a need for capital, and this can be an answer to that, easing the foreign equity restriction. Our government is struggling to go into build program. The government is right now very much into borrowing because it is the only way we can continue. So we need all the possible private capital. And when we open up the economy, we are not only opening our doors in to capital, but also to technology transfer. So that is what is different today, and in the in the next 10 to 20 years, talagang yun po yung realidad. We have scarce capital, and we need to open up the economy.
Uh, Also, with regard to no, as you mentioned, with regard to sustainable goals, no, with regard to the environment, for example, the entry of FDIs, some in many cases will actually also strengthen what our links to those goals. Why? Because more often than not, multinationals also bring in their CSRs in play.
Managerial expertise.
Also, corporate social responsibility.
Yeah,
That's
and
what I meant, right? So, and why? Because they have global brands, images, no, cultures that they seek to propagate. And again, it may also be helpful for us in that end. Thank you.
All right. This one is directed specifically to Congressman Garbin by Joseph Solis Alcaide Alberici. Do you even consider further reforms on labor and education system labor that made labor export possible, not just overhauling FDI laws through constitutional reform?
well, Congress is always open to receive um, um, priority measures that will address the issue on labor standards or any labor reforms. But right now we have a labor laws that are in place, which need just to be properly enforced and implemented by the appropriate agencies concerned. In fact, yung business community nagrereklamo na sa sobrang higpit ng labor laws natin. But yeah, what really needs is the enforcement, the faithful observance of labor laws. And we in Congress will continue to exercise our oversight power to see to it that these labor laws are faithfully executed by government agencies concerned. If ever there is lapses, then we are happy and willing to receive any um, um, remedial legislations to that effect.
All right. Combining two similar questions sent in from one of CRC's regular event patrons, Mahi Castillejos. Actually, she asked this very early on, and I think she directed this towards Usec Malaya, but I'm pretty sure it's also open to the other panelists. Uh, Filipino companies can be pressured into respecting environmental, cultural, and union concerns when formal mechanisms are too slow, such as when environmental damage needs to be stopped right away. Um, how can we do that in the case of, say, a Chinese or Russian company? What happens when they want to tear down beloved heritage trees or change the structure of an 80, 90-year-old building that may fall under their influence? How are we sure foreign companies will respect our right to organize and won't engage in union busting? Hard question.
Yes. I'm here, Remy. Is that question for me?
Yes, it was asked for you, sir, but I think it's also open to the other panelists
Sige,
after you, sir.
I'll take a stab at it. Um, Unang-una, we are a sovereign nation, and being a sovereign nation, all laws apply to all. So it doesn't mean that because it's a Chinese or a Russian company that's going to come in, it's not subject to Philippine laws. In fact, the Chinese companies are under too much microscope that anything they do is immediately the subject of much speculation. It's already national issue. No, look at what happened to the Pogos. No, it was subjected to a lot of um, criticism. No, they're placed under a microscope. No, and many of them have left already. Uh, so it doesn't necessarily mean that they will run shad over our regulations or those enforced by our uh, law enforcement agencies. No, yun kasi yung palagi nating there's this impression that um, when the foreign investors come in, they will lord it over. In fact, that it would not necessarily be the case because they will still adjust to Philippine conditions and Philippine laws. Karamihan nga sa kanila nagrereklamo na kanina there were questions about the LGU's capacity to absorb this foreign investment. You know, they will have to apply for a mayor's permit. They will have to apply for an occupational permit. They will have to go to the DTI to get, ang dami po nila kailangan gawin, no? So they're not exempted, and if they're exempted, there will be a violation of law, and makukulong naman yung mga government agencies who would not issue or who would sit on or who would exempt them from all of these regulations. So nasa enforcement na po yan ng ating mga government agencies, no, to ensure that all of our regulations are implemented and enforced, whether these are foreigners or local investors.
All right. That brings up an interesting point also for ease of doing business in the Philippines. Would our other
Let me
panelists
also
share
add
comments?
that we have proper government agencies to regulate market competition. And also, proper protection may be added in enabling legislation. So this is the beauty of RBH2, where Congress will be given the flexibility to enact measures that will be um, attuned to the needs of the present economic and technological conditions. So the remedy is always legislations.
Although the question was specifically for points in time, sir, where uh, there isn't much time for legislation to work. I mean, I think the question was specifically for uh, executive uh, engagement. Uh, Although, yes, that is, of course, very important as a point. The legislation does offer us protections. Uh, Dr. Tan, it seemed like you had something to say. Mr. Tan, sorry.
So sorry. Continue.
Oh, okay. Actually, sir, this next question is directed towards you specifically. Again, from Sir Paulino Valenzuela. Mr. Tan, which explanatory variables have greatest empirical significance in influencing FDI and employment at the macro level? Any sectoral level analysis of the effect of the theoretical factors you specified so that business entrepreneurs will be guided accordingly?
Uh, uh, the equation that I got again it's a total, no, at the macro national level. So I didn't go to the different sectors on that. Although of course, in computing for the total employment effects, no, I generated employment multipliers by sectors. What does that mean, right? If you generate an X number of dollars in FDI into this sector, it will generate Y number of jobs. It will come out there. You
All right, from an anonymous attendee, what is the evidence that shows that foreign direct investment improves the wages, household income, and or purchasing power of workers? In addition, do foreign companies do business in other nations? Don't foreign companies do business in other nations because the price of labor is cheaper? If yes, will the low price of labor lead to low wages for Philippine workers? This was an anonymous question sent in. Any of our panelists?
I think I received news that's precisely their concerns that even the labor rates in wage rates in China have already gone up so much higher than before, right? So the demand is there. It will actually increase wages if the demand is sufficiently high. So
Natutunan ko kay Tim Cook, yung CEO ngayon ng Apple. And he stated that they go to China not because of cheap labor. They go to China but because of the skills that Chinese have acquired in the process of this opening up the economy and the technology transfer. And therefore, they are not paying cheap labors there. They are paying Chinese a very good um, sum of money because of their skills. And this is what FDI also offers to us. When they go here, they're not just bringing in capital and taxes to the government. They are bringing here, and they will transfer technology to our workers. And in the long run, they will be skilled workers that will land into a high-paying job. So yun sinabi ni Tim Cook that they go to China not because of cheap labors, but because they are highly skilled workers. And that is the one of the effect of FDI, technology transfer.
All right. Um, Wait a second. We seem to have some questions from media. I'm being told I'm just not seeing the hands raised. But is Sir RG Cruz of ABS-CBN on? Um, I believe he said he had a question. Perhaps we'll fix that. And let's go through one of the typed in questions first from our Zoom. Amado Sabio asks, how does Taipei, which is a significant trade partner, play into this? If this passes, will companies from ROC be able to invest in the Philippines despite the foreign policy of the PROC? Tough question. Okay.
uh, sorry, I didn't get the question.
Does Taipei, which is a significant trade partner, play into this? If these constitutional changes pass, will companies from the ROC be able to invest in the Philippines despite the foreign policy of the PROC? I think the question is more
I think
political
that's
in nature rather than economic.
yes, more political
Well,
than business
uh,
oriented.
let me put this. Let me put it this way. We have a constitutional impediment in our constitution that says foreign investors in some areas or sectors of our economy, welcome kayo dito, pero hanggang 40% lang kayo. So meaning, parang meron, parang meron no entry. Okay. Once you ease or lift that restriction, it sends a positive signal not only to Taipei, but to the rest of the business community that we're doing something of this 34-year-old economic policy that restricts the flow of foreign capital. So it's a signaling effect to our would-be investors that they are welcome here in our country. So yeah, it's like um, our business environment will be more attractive to FDI.
All right. The next question is on my question from Rosales Fe. I'm not sure which media agency she's from, but perhaps you can introduce yourself. Your audio should be on now. Huh. Okay, let's fix that again. And perhaps the next question from Joe Teddy Bugarin. Yes, again, an economics question. How sustainable are the FDI projects in the country? Uh, are we not having problems with FDI withdrawals? What's to prevent that from happening yet again uh, once we do have FDIs coming in? Sir, you're on mute, sir.
Well, uh, for answer of course is the hard assets that they put it in. No, it's not so easy to this to just get up and run from that. Uh, but also again goes to show you that when multinationals, the decisions of multinationals when they enter, right, before they enter, as I said, it may take months, years for them to actually scope the area, the business, etc. So when they come in, when they buy in, there's also, to put it bluntly, they also have an exit barrier to them because they invested so much in it. So uh, from that side, so yes, there are actually exit barriers uh, from them, imposed on them. Uh, uh, again, in the form whatever of hard investments they put in. Uh, so, thank you.
Would anyone like else like a crack at it? Or we can move on to the next question, which is political again in nature and also historical. This is a very interesting question. Why did the 1986 Constitutional Commission choose to insert restrictive economic provisions? What motivates them to do so? Uh, I'm not sure who. Usec Malaya, perhaps? Or Kong Garbin?
Yeah, Remy, in one of our discussions in the committee level, we invited Dr. Villegas, the chair of the Committee on Economy of the Constitutional Convention that drafted the 1987 Constitution. So yun, Chair. Ang sinasabi niya, when those restriction was inserted, parang hindi na nila pinansin masyado dahil galing sa isang diktadoryang pamamalakad at ang gulong-gulo ng Pilipinas noon. And they don't talk about globalization. Wala pa yung issue of globalization and trade liberalization. And the sentiment is more of protectionist and Filipino nationalism. And therefore, these were all accepted without any debate. But the realities 34 years ago, the circumstance then is no longer or is unavailing this time. The trade now and the trend now and the all the economic literatures presents and proves and supports liberalizations. And sabi niya nga ni Dr. Villegas, iba na yung realidad noon at yung realidad ngayon. And the reality is we need more capital and we have to ease those foreign equity restrictions. And as I have said time and again, that no constitution, however gifted its framers, could not foresee the needs of the future time. And therefore, it has to bend to the needs of time. The pangangailangan ngayon, ang realidad ngayon ay talagang dapat we open it as wide as possible. That's the word of Secretary of Finance. Ang gusto nga ni SOF, ni Secretary Dominguez, wala na yung unless otherwise. If we will open it, we open it as wide as possible. Siguro ang gusto niyan sabihin, 100% open mo na and lift all those restrictions. But we in Congress, we want to put up a safeguard. And the safeguard is a legislation. And when you speak of unless otherwise provided by law, it speaks of a legislations that will be debated upon. And of course, to determine whether it will always be for the good, for the common good.
All right. Anyone else want to add anything? Okay, another question. Oh, sir. Yes, go, please. Usec, Malaya.
Ni Kong Garbin, I was present when Kong Garbin presided over that meeting of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, and si Dr. Villegas, he himself was a member of the CONCO. Natanong din namin siya tungkol dyan, and he was the one who said that he was outvoted. No, he was outvoted because majority, the 87 Constitution kasi it was a product of the 1986 Constitutional Commission, and the 1986 Constitutional Commission were just appointed by President Corazon Aquino in her exercise of revolutionary powers. They were not elected by the people. So, reflection of the people power, the anti-Marcos crowd, no, that won the people power revolution. So at that time, the prevailing sentiment, no, was protectionist, Filipino first, no, anti-foreign investment, and this was also a reflection of our previous constitutions, no. Although we became a sovereign country in 1946 after the war, all of our constitutions have been protectionist. If you look back at the 1935 Constitution, meron ding protectionist provisions doon. So we are just following a long tradition of conservatism insofar as foreign investment is concerned. Unfortunately, as mentioned by Congressman Garbin, the social milieu prevailing then during the 35 Constitution, 73 Constitution, and the 87 Constitution have dramatically changed. No? Pag tinitingnan ko nga yung mga inabot namin ni Congressman Garbin, inabot pa namin yung mga plaka. Yung plaka, inabot pa namin yun kasi sa mga bahay ng mga lolo namin may plaka pa noon. And then, inabot namin yung tape, Betamax, no? Hanggang napunta sa sa VHS ngayon, Netflix na. So, grabe yung pagbabago 87 onwards, no. Now we are in a globalized economy, so napag-iwanan yung ating constitution, and we happen to have a constitution that is one of the most difficult to amend. The constitutions of other countries are subjected to amendments by the lawmaking bodies. No, in Germany, for example, their Bundestag can amend the constitution. Sa atin, papasa na sa Kongreso, 2 houses, tapos pupunta pa sa tao for plebiscite. No, so doon tayo nagkamali na the 87 constitution which was a reaction to Marcos rule, placed in stone the policies that were considered to be proper for that period. So ang ginagawa natin ngayon under the proposed amendments that was passed recently on second reading by Congress is to give Congress the flexibility. Actually, kung titingnan natin yung RBH2, wala namang, hindi nga tinatanggal doon yung mga yung mga restrictions. Nagdaglag lang tayo ng unless otherwise provided by law. Therefore, the default policy is restricted unless Congress says otherwise. Kaya napakaganda Napakaganda. We're not outrightly removing the restrictions. Meron pang secondary step, which is Congress will now decide. Sa mass media, anong papalitan? Sa education institutions, anong papalitan? Sa public utilities, anong pamapalitan? But hindi mo na kailangan magplebisito sa tao. Kongreso na lang ang magkailangan gumawa ng mga pagbabago, which is the proper procedure.
Okay. I received. Okay, I saw a question that was an immediate follow-up to that. I'm going to give everyone a chance to respond to it. How do we know the same autocratic or democratic conditions won't repeat themselves?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by autocratic?
I believe this was a reference to the 1986 situation. Regarding the protections that were put in by the 86 Constitution. Congressman Garbin?
Well, two things. Before this amendment can take effect, we have to comply approval of both houses of Congress, of which we can propose anything, but we cannot conclude because the power of ratification belongs to the Filipino people. And therefore, the two requirements of approval by Congress and ratification by the people of the proposed amendment must be complied with. So this is the safety and those proposal. And if ever this will be ratified by the Filipino people, then it is now quoted with a sovereign mandate wherein Congress will be given the flexibility, as stated earlier by Usec Malaya, to introduce legislations, whether to lift the restriction in the Constitution or ease the restriction by increasing the foreign equity participation, or it may even reduce the foreign equity participation as the need and the data arise. So this is the beauty of RBH2. We can totally revoke the restriction, we can maintain it, we can increase the restriction because we are given the flexibility, and that is also the safety that we are telling na ang remedyo talaga ay legislation. In fact, in most countries, they don't put. In fact, we are the only country in the world where our economic restriction is being embedded in the Constitution. Some other countries, they put it in legislation, and that's why it's flexible. It's easier for them to cope or respond to the needs of time. Tayo, talagang tinali tayo. Ginawang 10 commandments, nakasulat sa bato. At yun ang resulta for gun investment for the past 34 years. 34 years ago, when we, it was a product pala of an 8 decades of restriction. Since 1935, andyan na pala yan. So, kaya nga, napag-iwanan na tayo, naging kulela tayo.
Okay. Unless there are
Uh,
unless the other panelists want to add to that, I'll move on to the next question.
there's a comment here
Okay.
by Mr. Roscoe about saying regulations is not a problem, nor will be lax, etc. Well, in many cases, regulations are actually, poses a big barrier, to investments to market entries. For example, now ARTA is now conducting efforts precisely, for example, to streamline the putting up of telecom towers. Because before it had to go different stages of permits, etc., and even has to go through associations. And we do, But the point is, there are many uh, processes that are, that can be streamlined further. Yes, and also even, for example, comes to mind is, for example, putting up energy plants. Yes, it takes years just to comply with all the regulations. So yeah, it does pose a barrier in many certain cases.
All right. An anonymous attendee asks, what are the immediate plans to support weaker, smaller local businesses and workers whose operations might be possibly challenged or compromised by massive FDI-induced market competition? Large players versus small players, I think, is the question here. Anyone from the panel want to take a jab? Stab.
Oh, well, First, we are hoping that FDI will result to new jobs and more income for the government. But more importantly, the entry of big businesses may actually assist rather than hurt small players. Because, these small players can be subcontractors and they can perform economic activities without relying so much on their capital, or they can engage in activities which they might not be able to engage in due to financial and capital deficiency. So, ito yung pwedeng maging resulta nito.
All right. Another anonymous question. With the technology transfer, management techniques, and CSR insights we gain from FDI, how confident are we that the gains will outweigh the consequences given the existing political climate and cultural challenges in and outside our institutions and the competitiveness/readiness of our local enterprises who would compete in the market? What about the nationalist or protectionist economic policies in other countries? And what quality of FDIs can be expected? So a bunch of questions here. Perhaps like them. Maybe I should break that down to uh, specific questions first. How confident are we that the gains will outweigh the consequences when we get FDIs, given the competitiveness or readiness of our local enterprise?
Well, in the out of the 167 journals presented to us before the committee, 122 journals written by experts, international organizations, proves that FDI contributes uh, to the betterment of all sectors of the society. And therefore, these economic literatures will show that in terms of providing employment, uh, the human capital index, the you know um, addressing the issue on inequality by reducing poverty. It all shows that ang dala-dala nitong FDI ay ganito. So, with the 122 journals presented to us before the committee, uh, the uh, uh, the benefits far outweighs the perceived consequences or disadvantages being posed by the entry of FDI.
Okay, I think this follow-up is for that question, and I might direct it specifically to Mr. Tan. Um, the follow-up is from Jota de Bugarin. Good if it's horizontal integration, but if it's vertical integration, how will other small players not be forced out of business? And the best will have to be suppliers of the big, at best become just the suppliers of big players. You're on mute, sir.
Oh, sorry. Again, when you talk fine, when you talk about FDIs, what you already comes to your mind is the big multinationals, the billion-dollar companies, etc. But actually, there are many small scale FDIs also that come in, right? And that's it. And then when they come in and uh, take root, they sometimes they start small also. So in that sense, the sense that they're preying upon, no, the locals is the sense doesn't exist because that's it. The 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 notion of being of a predatory capitalist, no, it's not uh, it's not in their bu- business sense. No? Precisely because they start small, so that's it. They engage at the micro personal level, and they build it up also from there. And it's not almost again it's a traditional trope, right, of looking at multinationals as exploitative, etc., of being foreigners, but more often than not, what maybe multinationals coming in will actually what hire Filipino workers that from abroad come in here. So it goes both ways also. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, let me also add that the area of our national patrimony and the sectors of our economy that is being targeted to ease foreign equity uh, participation are those areas that needs um, big capital investment. So walang competition to sa maliliit na negosyante ngayon dito, domestic markets na maliliit. Because we're speaking about telecom, which needs billions of dollars of investment. We're speaking about transportation, like putting up bullet train or fast train in the area of putting up airports. Nagkakailan lamang po ang Ramon Ang sa atin that can invest 750 billion pesos like Bulacan Airport. So we need more Ramon Ang uh, here in our country. And of course, in the area of gas and mining oil, that is 40% equity, foreign equity limited. Talagang these are capital intensive na kung saan limitado yung players dito. Even our tycoons right now was able to talk to just after we pass by the RBH2 on second reading, we approved on second reading. I had a dinner with one of the top 10, di ko na-mention, isa sa pinakamalaman na pamilya. Sabi niya, tama yung ginagawa nyo kasi kami hindi naman kaya maglagay ng kapital doon sa mga investment na yon. Kulang naman ang aming kapital. So we need the entry of foreign capital in those areas of our sectors of that economy. So sa tingin ko po, it could be complementary and siguro masasabi ko pong walang alinlangan na ito ay makakasakit sa ating small players sa industriya ng pagninegosyo.
Okay, I've just been told there's time for only one last question, and I think that goes to Amado Sabio, who asks, may I ask how involved unions are in the discussions for this legislation? So it's specific to the deliberations. Okay, do we have any statements that spell out their position?
Well, as I've said, not only in the business sector, but of course in the labor groups, they were also invited. And of course, employers, the PCCI, the Makati Business Club, and all, of course, the Joint Foreign Chamber, the American Chamber, they were all invited. And so yung mga um, organisasyon na maraming empleyado, and they are all in support of pushing for this lifting the restrictive economic provisions of the Constitution as to the labor, the union sector. First, the committee assured that the entry of this foreign capital will not in any way make them immune from our labor laws and our labor standard. In fact, they will be of equal footing with regards to the observance of our regulatory processes, including that of the observance of the labor laws and labor standards.
Okay, so unfortunately, we do have a limited amount of time for this particular session, so we have to close the. Now, Dr. Tan, yes, Mr. Tan, sorry, did you want to add? Oh, that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we do have to close the Q&A
Oh, wait, sorry.
portion now.
Mind you,
We want to thank. Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Maybe on some final comment. Of course, now for now we're talking about FDIs for investment, but remember, once the, the open market, the ASEAN economic integration is coming in already, right? So in fact, it's not just FDIs that are going to come in. It's also what foreign professionals, right? Among ASEAN. So can you imagine the competition that we will be facing there? That has bears mentioned, right? So the more that we have to be ready for that notion. Okay, thank you.
Yes, we do have to be ready for that. Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Tan. But before we close, we just want to take one last poll to see what our audience thinks of an important topic. Poll question number 3 is, do you agree, it should be up on your screens now, do you agree that foreign ownership provisions of the Constitution need to be relaxed in order to help, not to do it alone, but to help reduce unemployment? So it's a multiple choice question, but it's just yes or no. To answer a question, we also acknowledge the presence of some more of our mayors, Leonila Montero from Panglao, wonderful place. I want to come back as soon as the restrictions are lowered. Rosa Olafson of the LGU in Baroy. Lorenzo Lorenzo Jr. of Gawilan. I'm not sure I got the name correct. Sorry, sir. Roberto G. Valerio, also of the Industrial Group of Zamboanga. He's the executive director. And UST DPA teacher Lorena Valerio. Thank you. Do we have the results yet? Okay, 77% said yes, we need to relax provisions in the Constitution to help reduce unemployment. And 24% said no. It's time, however, to formally close this session. And for that, may I please call on Ms. Pamela Dayan D. Carbonell, the Chief Project Officer of the DILG Center for Local and Constitutional Reform, or CLCR, for her closing remarks.
Yes. Yes, thank you. We'd like to thank our partners from CRC, Mr. Remy De Leon. Thank you so much for moderating today's forum. Thank you to our Senior Program Manager of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, Ms. Tonette de Jesus, to the Chairperson of the House Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Honorable Alfredo Garbin Jr. Thank you, sir. Mr. Leandro Tomas of the UPPAF Respond, Secretary Silvestre Bello from DOLE for his message of support, our partners from Sensei, led by Mr. Gary Olivar, Dr. Dean Lezan Perante Calina, the Dean of DAPG SPDM, our partner from Blueprint.ph, Mr. Iro Brillantes, and civil society partners represented by the core movement chairperson, Attorney Vicente Reville. Thank you to the members and members of the Interagency Task Force on CORE, our local chief executives present today, our DLG directors, our field officers, various government agencies, LGOOs, MLGOOs, academicians, students, and online viewers. Thank you very much for giving your time and participation and active participation in this forum today. The recent financial and health crisis had and has serious widespread impacts on the economy, which everyone deeply feels. From those who lost their jobs or retained work but are always unsure if papasok ba sila ngayong araw o ngayong linggo, walang kasiguraduhan, to those who lost their businesses or struggling with the uncertain future. This pandemic calls for solidarity and makes us revisit our policies, laws, governance designs, if they are indeed equitable and inclusive for every Filipino. As we always say, there's no right time but now to talk about this measure and our passion and desires to rebuild our economy derailed by this pandemic led us here now. Kagaya nga na sinabi kanina ni Usec Jonathan Malaya and during our first session, very timely itong economic forum dahil dito natin hihimayin ang mga restriksyon na balakid sa pag-angat ng ating ekonomiya sa iba't ibang sangay ng industriya at kung ano ang mga solusyon na ating isinusulong. What happened specifically to South Korea, Taiwan, and other ASEAN countries was a phenomenon that could have happened much, much earlier in the Philippines. But of course, for many reasons explained in this session, these events did not happen. We've seen the data presented today of the costly experience set by the restrictive policies toward foreign investment. Strength should not be confused with stiffness. We've been able to discuss that improving the competitiveness of different sectors to reduce vulnerability, especially for our labor force, to uncertainties in the global market is, as Sec Bello said, a promotion of social justice. Furthermore, economic empowerment is a prerequisite for sustainable development. We've seen the correlations of FDI to potential progress for our labor force presented by Mr. Leandro Tan, but it takes sound public policies and a holistic approach and long-term commitment from all development actors. Making the Constitution less restrictive to foreign investment does not mean we put Filipinos last. It does not mean, and it does not make us less nationalistic if we welcome what Kong Garbin says as catalysts, because it's not the end-all be-all solution. Yes, we need other laws, as we've discussed in the open forum, such as addressing labor reforms, enhancing the competitiveness of the industries and service sector by ensuring regulations promote fair competition is also necessary. However, we've seen that amending the Constitution gives us a formidable foundation and is a medium to long-term plan and solution to recovery and empowerment. I'm happy to see that 77% here present in this forum agree that lifting the economic restrictions are needed to help reduce employment. We look at other countries and say, sana all? Well, we could have that preferred future if we are open to data-driven change of constitutional reform, and we are committed. It cannot happen organically, and it certainly is not an overnight job. But we have to move, we have to make our legislators work, or legislations work for us, and we have to participate. So we look forward to your attendance in our next sessions when we discuss more about MSMEs, agriculture, and more topics. So thank you again, everyone, for attending, and we look forward to the next sessions of this economic fora. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carbonell. That was a very interesting talk and a very nice background I noticed in the back. Thank you all once again for being with us today. Usec Malaya, Ms. De Jesus, Secretary Bello, Congressman Garbin, Mr. Tan, and Ms. Carbonell. Before we close the session, perhaps our speakers would like to share some closing thoughts with us. If you have anything you'd like to say, despite that long Q&A session.
Well, tatapusin po namin yung RBH2 sa susunod na linggo before the Senate Day adjournment that will be put into a vote on third reading. And that is a historic first for this 18th Congress to reach that far kasi for the past 6 or 7 Congresses talagang walang nangyayari dito sa pag sulong ng isang meaningful constitutional reform, which is to ease the restrictive economic provisions of the Constitution. Ang hingi lamang po natin sa mga nagsusuporta ay kalampagin din ho natin ang Senado, because without the active participation of the Senate, then this will not, sabi ko nga, patay na kaagad itong pinagpagura natin for the past 6 or 7 Congresses. Senate right now, some of them are still, nonchalant. I think they're living on a different realities, even questioning the timing of the approval on second reading of RBH2. Sabi ko nga, sinasabi nila, pandemic, bakit magchat-chat? I think they have to understand that the reason why we're doing that is not because of the this is long overdue. Dapat noon pa to ginawa. And especially now that we have this pandemic, we have cost so much in our economy. Marami nagsarang negosyo. Maraming nawalan ng trabaho. And that is the best time is really to have a business environment that is attractive to would-be investors, especially FDI. Of course, to our domestic market. So, tulungan niyo po kami na makumbisi yung ating Senate counterpart na suportahan itong constitutional reform na ito. Salamat at magandang umaga po sa inyong pag-imbita.
All right. Thank you very much, Congressman Garbin. Mr. Tan?
First, in many of the discussions earlier, there's also mentioned again about the questioning about the viability, the effectivity, or of our regulations. Well, that's precisely the objectives of UPPAF Respond project, which I'm part of. It's precisely to improve regulatory governance in select regulatory agencies, and also that's why we are working precisely with ARTA to improve that notion. That regulations, quote unquote, maybe could be considered as a barrier. Some say it's a necessary burden, but actually, what regulations, as we said, help are there to protect both sides, both sides of the agreement, both sides within the transactions. And it is, however, our job now precisely to ensure that regulations are their effects, their costs are commensurate with that. So that's why with respect to regulations, look, the Filipino traits of welcoming guests. No, we're always so welcoming in how we treat our guests and how do we improve their customer experience. That's why we are so renowned as a tourist destination. So in the same way, that's it. We have to capture that. We have to inculcate that investor experience coming into their country, right? So it's not just the character of the Filipino, etc. Of course, again, it's actually the first thing that they will notice aside from the airport when you come in is what, right? When you go to the immigration, etc. When they come in, it's the regulations that colors us in the eyes of for tourist visitors and investors. No? That's why I said earlier that our work, for example, with the anti-red tape authority, and improving precisely the quality of our regulations, actually, of course, has additional benefit of improving governance, reducing corruption, making government service more transparent. streamlining business processes to make it more efficient. That's why, for example, UPPAF Responded has said is also working in improving the business permits and licensing systems of select LGUs, such as Quezon City, Manila, and Pasig. We do that, and we hope to share the fruits of our labor, uh, so that we can showcase these three LGUs as model LGUs in undertaking DPLS reform, for example. Okay. With that, I would like to thank also the organizers of this event, um, CRC, Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, and I look forward to participating in future events, not necessarily as a panelist, but also as a participant, as a contributor from the audience. Thank you.
We would love to have you, sir. That's very entertaining to have you around. But that's all the time we have for today. Very warm farewell greetings to our participants and, of course, to the members of the press for being with us today. I know everyone is eager to know when the next session will be, so I'm pleased to announce the details of our next session entitled Opening Up the Economy, Impacts on Small Business. And, of course, there were questions about agriculture earlier in the session. Uh, that will be discussed also, I think, in later sessions. Uh, the next session is scheduled to take place on June 11, 2021, at the same time as this session, so 9 o'clock in the morning. And on the same venues, on the CRC Facebook page, on the DILG Facebook page, and on the core Facebook page, as well as on Zoom. Do like the social media accounts of DILG, core, and the CRC for all our and of all our partners, where you will be able to find updates about the next session. Now, just some last reminders for all our participants. Post-evaluation form links will be sent to your email, so please help us improve our activity further. It's very important for us. All presentations will be available on Google Drive, so please check your emails after this session so you can browse and review. Certificates will be upon request, so please wait for the post-session email we will be sending you so you can have your request sent. Registration for session 3 will be sent to your emails so you can check, not shake, our Facebook pages, DILG, Core, and CRC for the link. Uh, should you want to review the whole session, you can watch a live recording of our Facebook pages flashed as we end this session. And of course, I want to review the output tables from earlier. So I will certainly be doing that this afternoon. Once again, thank you very much. See you in June. Keep safe, everyone. Mabuhay.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.